Look at her, one of the nobles sneered. She traded centuries of honor for a white, death-world ape. The laughter echoed through the hall of ancestors before anyone else dared to speak, and that single sentence landed harder than any weapon ever could. Lady Lyra Vaylor lowered her eyes for only a moment, not because she believed them, but because hearing those words come from her own family still hurt. Standing beside her, Marcus Donovan did not move. 6 feet 2 inches tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple dark suit instead of military dress blues. He looked almost painfully ordinary compared to the jeweled robes and polished armor surrounding him. His hands rested loosely behind his back. His breathing never changed. If someone had walked into the room at that exact second, they would have assumed the human husband hadn't even heard the insult. They would have been wrong. The grand chamber overlooked the glowing skyline of Vaylor Prime, where floating towers stretched into violet clouds and thousands of guests had gathered for the annual remembrance ceremony honoring the founding bloodlines. Every branch of the Vaylor family had arrived. Politicians, admirals, industrial magnates, celebrities. They all smiled politely until Marcus entered beside his wife. Then the whispers started. She could have married royalty. Instead, she married that. Humans really do collect anything they can survive. Lyra squeezed Marcus's hand just once. It was a tiny gesture almost nobody noticed. "We don't have to stay," she whispered softly. Marcus glanced at her with the same calm expression he had worn since they left home that morning. "You wanted to come," he answered. "I'm staying as long as you want to stay." She forced a small smile, grateful that after 5 years of marriage he still understood exactly what she needed without making a scene. She had spent months convincing herself that maybe today would be different. Maybe enough time had passed. Maybe her family would finally see the man she loved instead of the species he came from. Instead, Lord Cassian Vaylor slowly descended the marble staircase carrying a crystal goblet, stopping only a few feet away. His silver ceremonial robes shimmered beneath the lights as he looked Marcus up and down with open disgust. "Tell me, human," he said loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear, "does pretending to be civilized ever become less exhausting?" More laughter followed. Marcus simply met his eyes. "Depends who I'm standing next to." A few surprised guests exchanged glances. Cassian smiled as if amused. "Careful. Confidence borrowed from your wife's name still isn't confidence." Lyra stepped forward. "That's enough, Cassian." "No," he replied without even looking at her. "You embarrassed this family. We're simply acknowledging your decision." The room grew quieter. Even those enjoying the spectacle sensed the line was getting dangerously close. Marcus noticed Lyra's shoulders tense. He remembered seeing that same look years earlier when she told him she was giving up her inheritance to build a quiet life with him on a farming colony where nobody cared about noble titles. He had promised her then that she would never face the world alone again. Promises mattered to Marcus Donovan. They always had. Cassian raised his glass one final time. The Vaylor blood deserved better than a human husband. Marcus looked at his wife before returning his attention to the nobleman. His voice stayed low, steady, almost gentle. "I heard enough." There was no anger in the words. No threat. No raised voice. Just quiet certainty. Most people in that ballroom dismissed the sentence as surrender. Only Lyra noticed something almost invisible. Marcus had stopped wearing his wedding smile. Marcus and Lyra left the ballroom without another word. Nobody tried to stop them. Behind them, the music slowly returned, followed by scattered laughter, as if nothing important had happened. That bothered Lyra far more than the insults. It was how ordinary it all felt. As the doors closed behind them, the cool evening air washed over the palace terrace. The twin moons hung above the city, reflecting across the glass towers that had once made her feel proud to call this world home. Now they only reminded her of everything she had walked away from. She leaned against the stone railing and stared into the lights below. "I am sorry," she said quietly. Marcus looked at her. "For what? You should never have had to hear that." He gave a small shrug. "People say stupid things every day." She let out a humorless laugh. "You know that is not what hurt." Marcus nodded. Of course he knew. It was never about him. It was about watching the people who had raised her act like strangers. She folded her arms tightly. "I kept telling myself they would eventually accept us. Every year, I believed it would get easier." Marcus rested beside her, leaving just enough space to let her breathe. "Hope is not a bad thing." She looked at him, her blue eyes tired. "No, But maybe I held on to it longer than I should have. They stood in silence for nearly a minute. Marcus had never been someone who rushed to fill quiet moments with words. Back when they first met on a humanitarian relief mission, that silence had confused Lyra. Eventually, she realized it was one of the reasons people trusted him. He listened before he spoke. He thought before he acted. "Do you remember the farm?" Marcus finally asked. A genuine smile appeared on her face for the first time that evening. "The broken fence. The one that collapsed 3 times. You refused to read the instructions." Marcus smiled. "Real men build first. Instructions are for later." She laughed softly. "You spent 6 hours fixing what should have taken 20 minutes. It turned out pretty good in the end." It leaned. Only a little. For a brief moment, the palace disappeared. They were back on their quiet colony, where mornings smelled like fresh coffee, engines, and wet soil instead of polished marble and expensive perfume. They had built that life together from nothing. No titles, no servants, no politics, just 2 people trying to make an honest home. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph, the old-fashioned printed kind. It showed the 2 of them standing beside their pickup truck after finishing the first harvest. Dirt covered both of their clothes. Lyra's hair was a mess. They looked happier than anyone in the royal ballroom ever had. "That is my family," Marcus said, looking at the picture instead of the palace behind them. "Not the people inside." Lyra slipped her hand into his. "Then let us go home." Marcus looked back toward the towering palace one last time. The laughter drifting through the open windows had finally faded, replaced by distant music and celebration. He slipped the photograph back into his pocket and gave one slow nod. "Yes," he answered calmly. "It is time to go home." Neither of them noticed the elderly palace groundskeeper quietly watching from across the courtyard. He had served 4 generations of the Vaylor family, and after seeing Marcus's face as he walked away, the old man whispered to himself, "They still think they humiliated the human. They have no idea they just lost the only man who was still willing to forgive them." The trip home took almost 6 hours through civilian jump lanes, and neither of them talked much after leaving Vaylor Prime. Marcus drove the old pickup across the dirt road leading to their farm just as the first light of morning reached the hills. Their property was nothing special by galactic standards. 20 acres, a weathered red barn, a machine shed, and fields stretching toward a quiet river. To Marcus, it was the most valuable place he had ever owned because every board, every fence post, and every fruit tree represented a choice they had made together instead of a duty someone else had assigned them. Lyra stepped out of the truck and breathed in the cool morning air. "I forgot how much I missed this place," she said. Marcus smiled. "Home usually smells better than politics." She laughed, and hearing that sound eased something inside him that had been tight since the palace. Their neighbor, an older human named Walter Hayes, waved from across the fence while carrying a toolbox. "You 2 made it back already?" he called. "Thought you would be gone another couple of days." "Plans changed," Marcus answered. Walter studied their faces for a second before nodding. "Well, if either of you need anything, coffee is hot." "Thanks, Walter. You know where to find me." That was one thing Marcus loved about colony life. Nobody asked questions until you were ready to answer them. By noon, Marcus was repairing an irrigation pump that had started making an awful rattling noise before they left. He preferred fixing engines over thinking about people. Machines always told the truth. If something broke, there was a reason. Human beings were rarely that simple. Lyra sat on the porch with a mug of tea, watching him work. Every now and then she caught him staring into the distance for a second longer than usual. Most people would never notice. She did. After 5 years together, she could read the smallest changes in his expression. "You are thinking about them," she said when he finally walked over for a drink of water. Marcus shook his head. "Not really." She raised an eyebrow. "That means yes." He smiled faintly. "I am thinking about promises." "What promises?" Marcus looked across the fields where the wind rolled through rows of wheat. "The day we got married, I told you that nobody would ever make you feel alone again." Lyra reached for his hand. "Marcus, they embarrassed themselves, not me." "Maybe." He looked down at their joined hands. "But I should have seen it coming. I should have protected you from having to hear any of it." She gently squeezed his fingers. "You stood beside me. That was enough." He wanted to believe her. He really did. But soldiers carried responsibility differently. Years of protecting people had rewired something inside him. If someone under his care was hurting, even emotionally, some part of him automatically assumed he had failed. Late that afternoon, while organizing tools inside the barn, Marcus opened an old metal cabinet looking for replacement bolts. A small black case sat untouched on the highest shelf beneath a layer of dust. He stared at it for several seconds before closing the cabinet again without touching it. Outside, hidden nearly half a mile away on the ridge overlooking the farm, two sleek surveillance drones silently recorded the property before disappearing into the clouds. Marcus never saw them. Lyra never heard them. But somewhere far beyond the colony, a message appeared on a private screen. The report contained only one sentence. The human has returned home. Continue Phase 2. 3 days passed, and life settled into the familiar rhythm Marcus had always wanted. Before sunrise, he checked the irrigation lines, repaired an aging tractor, and shared breakfast with Lyra on the front porch while the valley slowly woke beneath a blanket of morning fog. To anyone driving past the farm, they looked like an ordinary married couple enjoying a quiet life far away from the politics of the galaxy. That illusion lasted until Walter Hayes pulled into the driveway with an expression Marcus had never seen before. Walter climbed out of his truck holding a small envelope. "This was left in my mailbox before dawn," he said. "It had your name on it." Marcus accepted the envelope without speaking. There was no stamp, no return address, only his name printed in perfect block letters. Lyra stepped closer. "Do you know who sent it?" Marcus slowly opened the envelope and unfolded a single sheet of paper. There were only 9 words. "You were warned once. Leave her before she shames us again." Walter frowned. That does not sound like somebody trying to make peace. Marcus folded the paper in half. "No, it does not." Lyra quietly closed her eyes for a moment. "They followed us." Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked across the road, then toward the tree line, then up at the clear morning sky. It was an old habit from another life, one he thought he had buried years ago. Walter noticed it too. "Marcus, something feels wrong." Walter glanced around. "You think somebody is watching?" Marcus forced a small smile. "Probably just my imagination." But deep down he knew it was not. That evening, after Walter left, Lyra found Marcus replacing the batteries inside the old security cameras around the barn. "Those cameras have not worked in years," she said. "They will tonight." "You really believe my family would come all the way out here?" Marcus tightened the final screw before looking at her. "I believe pride makes people careless." She walked over and rested her head against his shoulder. "I hate that this is happening because of me." Marcus immediately shook his head. "Do not ever carry that weight." "But if I had never—" He gently interrupted her. "You chose love. That is never something to apologize for." She smiled sadly. "You always know the right thing to say." "Not always." He looked toward the fading sunset. "Sometimes I just know what people need to hear." After dinner, Marcus stepped into the machine shed alone. He stood in front of the same black case he had ignored a few days earlier. This time he reached for it. Dust covered the lid as he carried it to the workbench. The latches opened with a soft metallic click. Inside rested an old military challenge coin, a faded unit patch, and a satellite communicator no larger than a wallet. The battery indicator was still green. Marcus stared at the device for a long time without touching it. Finally, he closed the case again. "Not yet," he whispered to himself. "There has to be another way." Unknown to Marcus, the surveillance team hidden beyond the valley transmitted another update before midnight. "The human has located the emergency communicator but has not activated it. Continue observation. Await authorization." Somewhere many light years away, Lord Cassian Vaylor read the report, smiled into his glass of expensive wine, and made one mistake that would soon change everything. He assumed Marcus Donovan was still trying to avoid a fight. The next morning began like every other morning Marcus had dreamed about during the years he wore a uniform. Fresh coffee, quiet fields, the distant sound of birds settling over the river. For nearly an hour, he almost convinced himself that the uneasy feeling from the past few days had finally faded. Then his communicator chimed. It was not the old military device locked inside the black case. It was the regular civilian terminal mounted on the kitchen wall. Lyra answered first. "Donovan Residence." A cheerful voice replied, "Good morning. This is Nora Bennett from the Colonial Agricultural Cooperative. We are calling because someone filed a legal challenge against your farm ownership records. We wanted to verify a few documents before placing a temporary hold on your export license. Lyra frowned. There has to be some mistake. I hope so, ma'am. The complaint was submitted less than 2 hours ago by a law firm representing the Vaylor estate. Marcus slowly looked up from the kitchen table. Lyra covered the microphone. They are trying to take the farm. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Outside, the wheat moved gently beneath the breeze as if nothing had changed. Tell her we will send every document she needs. Lyra nodded and continued the call. 20 minutes later, another message arrived. Their supply shipment had been canceled. By lunchtime, their banking network reported unusual verification delays. Before sunset, 3 local business partners politely informed Marcus they would have to suspend contracts until the legal dispute was resolved. None of the conversations were hostile. Nobody threatened them. Yet every phone call quietly pushed them a little closer toward isolation. Walter Hayes drove over after hearing rumors around town. I have lived here 30 years, he said, removing his hat. I have never seen paperwork move this fast. Marcus handed him copies of the notices. Walter read them one by one before shaking his head. This is coordinated. I know. You planning to fight them in court? Marcus looked toward the fields again. If it stays in court, absolutely. Walter noticed the careful choice of words. And if it does not? Marcus did not answer. That silence worried Walter more than any angry speech could have. After dinner, Lyra found Marcus sitting alone on the porch. He was holding the old printed photograph from their first harvest again. She quietly sat beside him. I never wanted my family to follow us here. Marcus smiled without looking away from the picture. They are not here because of you. Then why? Because some people cannot stand seeing someone walk away from the power they worship. She leaned against him. I wish they could just let us live. Marcus finally looked at her. So do I. Long after Lyra had gone to bed, Marcus remained outside watching the stars. Finally he stood, walked into the machine shed, opened the black case once more, and picked up the satellite communicator. He turned it over in his hands before pressing a single button. The screen illuminated immediately. It displayed only one question. Emergency authorization requested. Confirm identity. Marcus closed his eyes for several seconds. Then he placed his thumb on the scanner. Somewhere across the galaxy, secure terminals that had remained silent for nearly 8 years awakened one after another. Retired officers looked up from family dinners. Former intelligence analysts paused in the middle of ordinary workdays. An old Navy captain smiled sadly before whispering. Marcus finally called. Nobody asked what had happened. They already knew one thing. If Marcus Donovan had broken his silence, someone had pushed a good man far beyond the point where he believed patience could solve the problem. Marcus did not sleep that night. He sat alone on the porch as the first rays of sunrise crept across the fields, a mug of cold coffee forgotten beside him. The satellite communicator rested on the table, silent again after sending its encrypted signal. Lyra stepped outside wearing an old flannel jacket that actually belonged to Marcus. She sat beside him without saying anything. After a long moment she asked, "Did someone answer?" Marcus nodded once. Not with words. What does that mean? He smiled faintly. It means they received it. She looked down at the communicator. Who are they? Marcus leaned back in the wooden chair and watched the morning fog disappear across the valley. People who promised each other a long time ago that if one of us ever asked for help, nobody would ask questions first. Lyra studied his face. You never told me much about your military years. Because I wanted them to stay there. She reached over and took his hand. I never wanted to bring them back. Marcus gently squeezed her fingers. You did not. Before either of them could say another word, several vehicles rolled slowly onto the dirt road leading toward the farm. They were ordinary pickup trucks covered with road dust, nothing expensive, nothing that attracted attention. Walter stepped out of the first truck wearing his usual work boots. Behind him climbed an older woman carrying a toolbox, a heavy-set mechanic in oil-stained coveralls, a retired sheriff, 2 ranchers from neighboring properties, and several people Marcus recognized from town. Walter smiled. Morning. Marcus looked confused. What is all this? Walter shrugged. Folks heard somebody was trying to pressure good neighbors into leaving. Around here we do not like that much. The older woman extended her hand. Linda Brooks. Electrical engineer. I brought replacement cameras. The mechanic grinned. Name is Frank. I heard your tractor could use some work. Another man tipped his hat. Tom Reynolds. I build fences. Marcus blinked. almost speechless. You all came because of us. Walter laughed. No. We came because bullies usually quit when they realize somebody is standing together. Lyra quietly wiped away a tear before anyone noticed. Within an hour, the peaceful farm looked busier than it had in years. Fresh security lights appeared around the barn. Broken gates were repaired. New communication cables were buried beneath the driveway. Nobody asked Marcus about his past. Nobody treated Lyra like an outsider. They simply showed up because that was what neighbors did. Marcus watched them work with an expression Lyra had never seen before. It was not relief. It was gratitude mixed with guilt. Walter eventually walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. You are not used to accepting help, are you? Marcus smiled. Not really. Walter nodded knowingly. Well, you better start learning. Several light years away, Lord Cashin received another intelligence report. Surveillance confirmed increased civilian activity at the Donovan property. Local colonists appear loyal to the human. Cashin dismissed the report with an impatient wave. Farmers and mechanics, he said with a laugh. They cannot change anything. His advisors laughed with him. None of them noticed that the report also listed 3 names that had quietly arrived in the colony overnight under civilian travel records. To everyone else, they looked like ordinary retirees. To a handful of governments that still remembered old classified files, those 3 names had once been enough to end wars before they ever reached the evening news. The 3 newcomers never introduced themselves with military titles. To everyone else in town, they were simply friendly retirees looking for a quiet place to spend a few weeks. One repaired an old windmill before anyone even asked. Another spent an afternoon helping Walter replace a leaking water line. The third sat outside the local diner drinking coffee and talking baseball with people who had no idea they were sharing breakfast with someone whose name had once appeared in classified briefings across half the galaxy. Marcus watched all of it from a distance. He recognized each face the moment they stepped onto his property, even though every one of them had more gray hair than the last time he had seen them. That evening, after the volunteers headed home, one of the visitors walked into the barn carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. His name was Daniel Brooks. 20 years earlier, he had commanded logistics for Marcus's unit. Now he looked like somebody's favorite grandfather. He handed Marcus a cup. Still take it black? Marcus accepted it with a faint smile. Some habits survive retirement. Daniel looked around the quiet barn. Nice place. It is. You built all this. Most of it. Daniel nodded with genuine admiration. I always figured if anyone deserved peace, it was you. Marcus leaned against the workbench. I thought I had it. Neither man spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. You know we all came the second your signal arrived. I know. You also know that none of us came because of paperwork or land disputes. Marcus stared at the floor. I was hoping you would stay out of it. Daniel laughed softly. You never understood how this works, did you? Marcus looked up. Daniel continued. You spent years making sure the rest of us came home to our families. You missed birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and every promotion you deserved because you refused to leave anyone behind. Did you really think we would ignore your call? Marcus did not answer because there was nothing to say. Daniel reached into his jacket and placed a small folded photograph on the workbench. It showed 8 younger soldiers standing together in dusty uniforms, smiling into an old camera. Marcus recognized every face. 3 of them were gone now. The others had answered his signal within hours. You remember what you told us after Carson retired? Daniel asked. Marcus smiled sadly. Family is not always the people you are born with. Exactly. Daniel pointed toward the farmhouse where Lyra's kitchen lights glowed through the evening darkness. Looks like you built another family out here. Marcus followed his gaze. Through the window, he could see Lyra laughing with Walter and Linda while serving homemade pie. For the first time in days, she looked genuinely happy. Daniel lowered his voice. Then protect this family the same way you protected us. Marcus took a slow breath. I never wanted any of you pulled back into my problems. Daniel smiled. Too late. At that exact moment, hundreds of light years away, financial analysts inside the Valor commercial network began reporting strange irregularities. Shipping contracts quietly disappeared. Longtime investors unexpectedly withdrew support. Several influential partners postponed meetings without explanation. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no threats, no public accusations, and no obvious attacks. Just a series of small, perfectly legal decisions that slowly loosened the foundation beneath one of the oldest noble houses in the galaxy. Lord Cashin dismissed the reports as temporary market fluctuations. Marcus, meanwhile, still had no idea that the people drinking coffee in his barn had already begun keeping a promise they had made to him many years before. 2 weeks later, the first public cracks finally appeared. Marcus was replacing boards on the back porch when Walter came jogging across the yard holding a tablet. He was breathing hard, not from the distance, but from disbelief. "You need to see this." Marcus wiped the dust from his hands and looked at the screen. The headline was simple. Valor Interstellar Logistics announces sudden leadership review following investor withdrawal. Another article appeared beneath it. 3 major banking partners had suspended negotiations with the family holdings pending an internal audit. A third report mentioned that 2 longtime allies had unexpectedly resigned from advisory positions. Marcus quietly handed the tablet back. "That is unfortunate." Walter stared at him. "Unfortunate? Marcus, these people have controlled trade routes for over a century. This kind of thing does not just happen." Marcus only shrugged. "Businesses make decisions." Walter narrowed his eyes. "You already know something, do you not?" Before Marcus could answer, Daniel Brooks walked out of the barn carrying a toolbox. "Morning, Walter." "Morning." Walter looked from Daniel to Marcus and back again. "You two have the exact same expression. That makes me nervous." Daniel laughed. "You worry too much." Walter pointed at the tablet. "Maybe, but somebody is giving one of the richest families in the galaxy the worst month of their lives." Daniel took a quick glance at the headlines before handing the device back. Sounds like consequences finally found the right address. Later that afternoon, Lyra sat beneath the old oak tree overlooking the fields while reading the same news reports. Marcus joined her carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. She looked up with genuine confusion. "I have never seen my family lose anything." Marcus handed her a glass. "Everybody loses something eventually. Do you think this has anything to do with the signal you sent?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he answered honestly. "I do not know exactly what my friends are doing." "You trust them anyway?" He smiled. "With my life." Lyra rested her head against his shoulder. "I do not want revenge." Marcus wrapped an arm around her. "Neither do I." "Then what do you want?" He looked across the wheat fields shimmering beneath the afternoon sun. "I want them to understand that people are not decorations. They cannot humiliate someone, chase them across the galaxy, destroy their home, and expect life to continue like nothing happened." She nodded slowly. "I think that is called accountability." Marcus smiled. "Exactly." At that same moment, inside the towering Valor estate, Lord Cashin slammed a financial report onto a polished conference table. "Find out who is behind this," he demanded. "Every audit is legal. Every contract cancellation follows regulation. Every investor claims they simply changed their minds. That is impossible." One advisor hesitated before speaking. "There is another possibility." Cashin glared at him. "Say it." Several organizations involved in these withdrawals were founded or advised by retired human veterans. The room became very quiet. Cashin scoffed and waved the idea away. "Retired soldiers do not dismantle dynasties." None of the advisors answered. One elderly financial director quietly remembered an old saying he had heard years before from a human ambassador. The most dangerous people were rarely the ones still chasing power. They were the ones who had already walked away from it. For the first time since mocking Marcus Donovan in the palace ballroom, a few members of the Valor family began wondering if they had misunderstood exactly who they had insulted. Autumn arrived quietly, and with it came the final chapter no one in the galaxy expected. The farm looked exactly the same as it always had. The wheat was ready for harvest. Walter still stopped by every Saturday morning for coffee. Linda continued arguing with Marcus about the best way to wire the new workshop, and Lyra laughed every time the two of them pretended not to enjoy the debate. Life had returned to something that finally felt normal. Then one afternoon, a transport landed at the edge of the property. There were no soldiers, no bodyguards, no parade of expensive vehicles. Only one passenger stepped onto the dirt road. Lord Cashin Valor looked older than he had just a few weeks earlier. His expensive suit could not hide the exhaustion on his face. He slowly walked toward the farmhouse until Marcus met him halfway across the field. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Cashin looked around at the quiet farm. "This is really what you chose over everything my family could have given you." Marcus answered without hesitation. Yes. Cashin lowered his eyes. I did not understand. Marcus remained calm. No, you did not. Cashin took a slow breath. Our companies are gone. Our political alliances collapsed. Even members of my own family walked away after learning what happened. Nobody threatened them. Nobody forced them. They simply decided they no longer wished to stand beside people who confused pride with honor. Marcus said nothing. Cashin looked directly at him. Did you do all of this? Marcus shook his head. No. Then who did? A faint smile crossed Marcus's face. People who believe that character matters more than titles. The answer seemed to drain the last of Cashin's certainty. For the first time in his life, he realized influence did not always come from wealth or noble blood. Sometimes it came from years of treating people with respect when nobody was watching. Lyra stepped onto the porch but remained silent, giving them space. Cashin turned toward her. Lady Lyra, I owe you an apology. She studied him for a long moment before quietly answering. I did not need your approval when I married Marcus. I do not need it now. But I hope one day your children never have to choose between love and family the way I did. Cashin slowly nodded. There was nothing left to argue. He returned to his transport and left without another word. Marcus watched the ship disappear beyond the hills before Walter wandered over carrying 2 cups of coffee. Everything settled? Walter asked. Marcus accepted the cup with a grateful smile. I think so. Walter chuckled. Funny thing about small towns. Folks remember who helped fix a fence a lot longer than they remember who owned the biggest house. Marcus laughed. Turns out that is true across the galaxy too. As the sun began to set, Lyra slipped her hand into Marcus's. Together they looked across the fields they had built with their own hands. There were no medals hanging on the walls of their home. No royal titles carved into stone. No monuments celebrating victories. Only a quiet life surrounded by people who chose to stand beside them because of kindness instead of status. Years later, people would tell different versions of the story. Some claimed an old human soldier had destroyed one of the most powerful bloodlines in the galaxy. Others insisted the family had destroyed itself. Marcus never corrected either version, because he understood something far more important. Families do not fall when someone insults them. They fall when they forget that respect is earned. Love cannot be inherited, and the strongest people are usually the ones who spend every day choosing peace until someone gives them no reason to keep choosing it.